everyone. Welcome to the Ashley Barlow Company podcast. I'm Ashley Barlow, your host. If you are a parent, a teacher, or someone who works at a school, or you're a community member, a volunteer, or a staff member at an organization that supports people with special education plans, a coach, a tutor, or even a grandparent, you're in the right place. Sit back with an ice cold glass of lemonade, put on your walking shoes and grab some headphones, roll down the windows and cruise. Ready, set, go. Educate, advocate, collaborate. Hi, Becca.
Hi, Ashley. How are you?
I'm great. I'm so happy that you could join us.
It's so nice to talk to adults after Christmas break.
Indeed, it is. Can I get an amen? Becca, I feel like when I introduce you to my audience, I should tell everybody our secret, but I'm afraid our husbands are going to know.
It's okay.
So Becca and I'm going to let Becca introduce herself to you all, but I'll tell you first that Becca and I were on the board of the Down Syndrome Association of Greater Cincinnati together, and occasionally our meetings would end before bedtime, which is bad because nobody wants to go to a meeting at night and then get home before bedtime. And so therefore, Becca and I have spent a lot of time outside in the parking lot of the DSAGC, visiting, enjoying one another's company, and also waiting for bedtime.
Well, it'll delay bedtime by at least 30 minutes if you come in right at the end. So
true. And it'll delay your happiness by at least 98%. Oh my gosh.
Parking lot conversations are the best.
They are parking lot conversations. There's nothing better. Becca, I'm so happy you're here. And my favorite thing about you is your kindness. I think you are the most genuinely kind, empathetic human that I know. And so I can't wait for that to infiltrate my podcast. Tell my audience a little bit about yourself, if you would.
Sure. Well, that's really super sweet. I appreciate that. So my name is Rebecca Scheerer, and I am mostly known as Becca from my good friends and also my students. So I am a mom to 3 kiddos, Eden, Wyatt, and Adeline. And our big connection, like you said, with the DSAGC is Wyatt has the diagnosis of Down syndrome. And then I am married to Josh, and I'm also an intervention specialist for a local school district. And I'm supposed to say that my thoughts and ideas are mine only and not my school district's. The lawyer and you will appreciate that.
Fine by me.
So
I sign all kinds of stuff and have to put that disclaimer on it.
Yeah. I started out as a undergrad. My undergrad degree is from Anderson University. I am in communication and public relations. So I worked in marketing communications for 8 years and decided that was a grind that I wanted to get out of. I am a PK, which means I'm a TK, not a preacher's kid. I'm a teacher's kid. Both my parents were teachers. My sister's a teacher. And I said, why don't I try this teaching gig? So I always knew I didn't want to have a traditional classroom. And I had worked with and babysat for a family who had a boy on the autism spectrum in high school and college, who I adored. And my sister said to me one day, I think you'd be a great IS. And I said, you know what, I think that would be great. So my master's and my teaching license came from Xavier. And so I've been doing that for 10 years now. So pretty cool.
That's awesome. And for people that aren't in Ohio or whose states don't call them intervention specialists, that just means special ed teacher. So that's what Ohio calls them. So, Becca, I think kind of the coolest thing about having you on the podcast is really having you kind of address things from the parent's perspective, from the teacher's perspective, from other perspectives of people at the table, because truly you can see things from the lens of everybody because you collaborate with so many people on the IEP team. As a teacher, and then you also are a parent and are very involved in parent community. So you know how parents feel, even if it's different, because your perspective is different since first you were a teacher.
Right.
So I think kind of my first question then is, talk about the push and the pull of the different interests. What are the principals concerned with? What are the gen ed teachers concerned with? What are the special ed teachers concerned with? The related service people? How does this kind of push pull of interests and values?
Yeah. It's a really fascinating dynamic. And of course, being in communication and like PR first, I think was a super helpful way for me to identify the players at the table and just the different dynamics of how people interact, communicate, roles and responsibilities. So, I've worked in, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4 different districts total. So it's been good. I've had a wide variety from very elite districts where they have a lot of money. And I've worked in probably one of the most poverty-stricken schools in the Cincinnati area. So I've seen a large gamut, a large spectrum of parents. I've seen a large spectrum of administrators. So, it's kind of going top down. So the principal's perspective, I think, is typically that they just, want us to be compliant with our documents. They want us to kind of work really hard to problem solve. And I'm fortunate now that I have an administrator who started in special education, but that's not really very common. So many times I've noticed that administrators will defer to student services managers or special education teachers because their knowledge is not as in-depth as those people who are what I call on the ground level. So, as a district rep, the principal is responsible for attending meetings, providing input, and, signing documents and ensuring that those documents and everything is in line with the dates and all the legal part of it, along with our student services managers.
And, I think this is a good follow-up question so that people really understand where administrators are coming from. What happens if they aren't compliant? What happens to them? Like how could they get into trouble and what could happen? Like, why does this matter?
So, and each district is kind of set up a little differently as far as who oversees what. So in smaller districts, the principal may play a bigger role than in a larger district where you might have some parallel administration as far as student services. But, the principal, that ultimately, if a teacher is not doing their job and being compliant, that could be their job. And in addition to that, as you well know, they could go through due process and have to be involved in any lawsuits that are up and coming against the district. So which
is expensive, and it is a ding on their old record with the Department of Ed, with their state department.
And as teachers, if we don't do our jobs properly, that can also affect us on our annual evaluations. So that could also affect a principal in their annual evaluations.
Yeah, I just think it's important for people to understand that, these people, sometimes I truly believe that most people aren't hesitant to say yes to something or have some pushback because they're mean. I truly believe it's because they, are trying to protect this other interest, this administrative interest that could mean their own personal jobs. It could mean a lack of compliance or their understanding of a lack of compliance, which is usually where the problem lies, that we all are kind of interpreting the laws and the regulations and stuff differently. But yeah, okay, so that's the principles. Then okay, you're going down the line.
Yeah. So then in kind of my building, and in other buildings, you'll have kind of like an educational evaluator, or kind of like a department head, or a case coordinator, which is my current role. I'm one of the a case coordinator for my building. So we just kind of also manage those compliance, make sure people understand any changes in the IEP, changes of expectations, the differences and for each building or by grade level. And then, you have your classroom teacher, who is obviously their primary role and responsibilities is being the manager of that IEP and executing their portion of it. You can also have related service providers, who would be your OT, PT, speech, and also, paraprofessionals then would work collaboratively with your intervention specialists. So there can be a large group of players. You can have vision specialists, teachers of the hearing teachers of hearing and deaf. I usually say the acronym. THODD. So teacher of the hearing or deaf or hearing impaired. Oh my gosh, I can't even get it out correctly today. It's the weekend.
And that acronym is different no matter what district you're in. So everybody else is like, I can't help you because I don't know what you're talking about.
Right. And in my, right now I work with both of those specialists collaboratively for students on my caseload. So, you can really, it can be extensive, the list of people that are on the team.
And then, all of the different interplays between all those people is different. Some people are friends with somebody and they don't want to overstep and affect, a friendship, or they are, they had a terrible experience with somebody. And so they're hesitant to maybe this happens a lot. And I always tell my clients, we have to look to see what interest they're protecting. And so sometimes somebody on the IEP team on the school side lacks confidence in another school person. Mm-hmm. And so they want to monitor a goal, or they want to not offer a goal, or not offer a service, or offer a service. And I try to explain to people that really sometimes what we're trying to protect is we're trying to protect some kind of interest. Right. And that interest really might then, what they're trying to do is protect the child, but they can't say like, oh, I had a bad experience with this particular related service person. Right.
That's a terrible SLP. And you don't want your child working with that person. Like you just can't do that professionally.
Yes. Yeah. And so I think that's important, kind of all this different push and pull of all of the different interests.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes I've noticed that it's not like we're all, all the school staff, sometimes people forget, like, we're human too, right? And that, certainly we make mistakes. I think most of the time when there's misunderstandings, it is a misunderstanding of communication. I've very rarely met ill-intended people, that are actually out maliciously to get someone. I mean, certainly it happens, but we all, as far as education goes, most of us are in this because we love kids and we're servants at heart. And so, that doesn't always make us great communicators necessarily, especially with adults. I know many teachers that you get into a room of adults and they want nothing to do with presenting or speaking or whatever, and you put them in a room of kids and they're shining, right? So, there's a myriad of reasons why someone may want to make a decision. And I've seen, especially with new teachers, people not want to admit that they don't know something. And they're trying to hide their ignorance, for lack of a better word. So
there's pride. There's pride that's kind of hiding this shame.
Or even shame. Yeah, shame. Yeah. It really, stems from a lot of like, oh my gosh, I don't want these people to know that I don't know this. So I'm going to pretend like I do, even though I don't.
The solution would just be if we could take Brene Brown to all of our meetings.
Exactly. Or to just say, I would like to learn more about this, or and here's a tip for a lot of teachers. If you're new, um, you know, there's a simple PR objective to this is, I'm not sure, I'm going to look into that. And that can solve a lot. Putting things on pause is okay. Like, it's okay to say, let me look into that and I'm going to get back to you. And
if
as a
your
parent,
heart,
I'd rather hear that than a wrong answer and then having to backtrack and fix it.
and so parents that are listening are like, oh, I've heard that though. Like, we're going to have to meet later because I have to look into that. And what I want is I want somebody to come to the meeting that has the authority to say yes, agree entirely. But there's so much gut in this, in the communication of knowing, okay, like they just said something, and are they actually intending to try to help? And so,
Right.
Becca, I think, for young teachers and experienced teachers to say, I don't really, I don't know, let me look into that, but I really want to say yes, basically, and to describe that. Maybe even this is how this would work if we could do this, if we've got the resources or the time or the teacher or whatever. I really think that helps entirely.
And a good, follow up to that as a parent would be to say, okay, let's go ahead and schedule a meeting in 4 weeks. And, or how much, or just ask, like, how much time do you think you need?
Yeah.
And we will, come around robin and meet as a team. I always recommend that if there's something that the team should follow up on, as a parent, that you should ask for that next meeting to be scheduled in the meeting when they say they need time.
Yes, please. Yes, and yes. So you've said it 100 times, but I preach it and I preach it and I preach it. I love for people to hear from other people. It all boils down, all of this conflict and the I don't know, or I'm afraid to say I don't know, or I'm trying to protect this interest. It all boils down to one thing: communication, right?
Yeah.
It all boils down to communication.
And, I kind of feel like as a teacher, I don't hear from my parents a lot. And as a good intervention specialist, I think that if you're doing everything that you need to do regularly, that you may not hear from your parents a lot. So things like things that I do to help with that is to ensure, that parent input is being received regularly. Putting out, monthly or bi-monthly. I mean, in COVID, I think we were doing weekly newsletters.
Yeah.
So, and now we go about monthly newsletters. I'm just about to send out my January one, soon. So, and that has a ton of, it has information about what we're doing, what skills we're working on, what's happening in the general education classrooms, what's happening with novels that we're going through. So, I front load, that fancy educational term. I pre-teach or front load a lot of information, or I try to kind of, I don't know. Oh, I'm losing the word. Like, think about things ahead of time.
Yeah, and to start the conversation with the parents, right?
Yeah, right. And I try and think about, well, if and here we go with that dual lens. If I were their parent, what would I want to know? And what do I want to know from not just, my son's education, but what do I want to know for all of my kids' education if they have anything specialized? So I kind of try and look at it from that lens.
And so that's my big question for today. And I love to ask this of teachers. I know the answer because I've asked this of you. But from a parent's perspective, then not from your perspective as a parent, I'm asking the question as a parent myself. That is, you're a teacher, you're a special ed teacher. What do you want to know from us? I have this communication bundle on my website that has not only the recommended communication that I recommend, but then also templates for it. And I preach a lot of communication. And I probably come close to over communicating with my son's team, but my son isn't super verbal. And I feel like I have to communicate even things that we do on the weekends and new words that nobody's going to be able to understand in order for him to get the most inclusive education that's possible.
Yeah.
But I also kind of can sense when I am over communicating and they're like, yeah, be quiet, lady. And then I try to back off. So my question to you is, what kinds of things do you want to know from home and from the community?
Yeah. I can't serve a child well unless I'm serving the whole child. So that means that I need to know, and I think the one thing that I feel like helps me the most is to know who your child is from your lens. I always say, parents most of the parents know their child best. I mean, unfortunately, there's been some really difficult and sad situations that I've had to deal with and be a part of as an intervention specialist. But most of the parents know their child best. So I want to know. I want to know about your life, and I want to know about what you think are your child's greatest needs. I want to know what you think your child's greatest strengths are. I want to know, some of it that I ask, I send a parent input form home. I never, I don't like to necessarily do just interviews because I feel like it doesn't always give parents enough time to think. Right. And so I like to send home a form far ahead of time with a list of questions, and it doesn't take too long. And I think that always is really helpful. But I ask both the student and the parent, just who is this child? Who are they to you? Their strengths, their challenges, their, future planning, and how you think that they learn best, whether or not they like, Super Mario Brothers or Roblox or the zoo, or, and what do you see as your future? And then I also try and adjust oftentimes, your fears. And I don't often think that we give parents enough space to allow them to kind of share that fearful part. So sometimes parents just want to express that, and I try and give them space to do that sometimes.
And if you know what the fears are, it can help you not only to address the child, which is your primary goal, but it can help so much in the meeting, because if people are coming to meetings with their fear and their baggage of experiences, their suitcase of experiences and knowledge base and, kind of like psychological health and physical health and all those things that we carry around with us in our little suitcases, if they're coming with specific fears and you trigger that fear unintentionally, the meeting could go sideways. And so I think it's super important to know, like, I'm afraid he's going to live with me to get forever. Well, that is totally different than the mom that says, I would never let him out of my house. He's going to live in my house. And in fact, we've outfitted our basement for him to live in,
Which may also be fear driven.
Which may also be
fear driven. I want to protect my child from the outside world.
In Ashley Barlow's case, that is 100% true.
Josh and I are always like, we're okay with Wyatt living with us for, a while. It'll be all right.
Forever. We always talk to Griffin about Uncle Jack living in his basement. Like, when we're too old and decrepit because, we've carried around a 60-pound 11-year-old for this many years, or for 1 year until he turns to a 70-pound 12-year-old that we're carrying around. We're going to make
jockey-sized children like me. little tiny jockey-sized children.
Yeah. He's not a very big Jack, but thank God, because he requires me to carry him sometimes. He doesn't require it, but it is what it is. So, I mean, I think that is super, super sage advice. And I always tell a story, and you might have a parallel one, but I tell a story about a child that we thought was a discipline case. when I was teaching, and this little boy came to us late. There was a Shigella outbreak. Shigella is you know what it is, Becca.
Yeah.
It's a virus that causes gastrointestinal things that oftentimes shuts down public pools. And like our children's hospital was full because of Shigella. It's also called shigellosis, and we had a dance that we used to say like shigellosis because it's just a funny word.
Yeah, my husband sees all the things in the ICU, so.
It is, well, yes. So, so this little guy was out for the beginning of the year. And then he came to us and he just had really, really troublesome behaviors. I mean, he was, he just randomly spit on a teacher, or he would use a curse word, and he was very, very, very young. And so the school where I taught this was my second year teaching. And the school where I taught, he had very, very old school, strict discipline models. And so there was yelling, there was like nose in the corner, kind of pulling children's chairs to different locations in the classroom. And I wasn't comfortable with any of those things, but I was observing those things from gen ed teachers. I was a German teacher in the elementary school.
Right, yeah.
And eventually this little guy started working. He wanted to hug me. He always wanted to hug me. And I thought, well, a hug could be something that he could earn. Now, this was my second year of teaching. I would do things differently now. But if he had a good morning, then they did make some reward system for him. If he got whatever, then he could hug me in the cafeteria. And if at the end of the day, I would stop in and I would give him a hug. And it was really, I think, more about connecting than the physicality of hugging. But sure, maybe it was a sensory thing. I'd love to go back and do this again with him differently. But about 2 or 3 weeks into the school year, he was in the hall. I had 5 minutes. So I stopped down and said, what's going on? And I looked at him and he was just sobbing. And I said, did you get in trouble? What's happening? And he looked at me with these like ginormous, beautiful eyes. He had the most beautiful, huge eyes. And the white of his eye was really, really, really bloodshot and injured. And then he had very dark skin. But then once I was looking at his eye, I realized that his eye was very, very bruised, like around, and the skin around his eye. He had been hit in the face. And I said, oh, honey, what happened to you? And then he told me this story about, how he had been injured. And it turns out he had like kind of intervened in a drug situation that was happening at home because he was trying to protect a sibling. And of course, you don't know, like nobody's going to advocate for their kid and say, hey, listen, we run a meth lab downstairs, and so he might be a little tired. Like, that's not going to happen. But the point in me, this was such an aha as a teacher of knowing, like, unless we know, we don't know what's happening at home and in the community. We don't know kids' experiences. We don't know what kind of trauma they've sustained or what kind of joy they've sustained, unless the parents tell them. Unless the parents tell the teachers don't know. And how important these people were putting him in the corner in the room and screaming at him. Right. But in fact, he was living in this really traumatic environment, and what he needed was a hug.
A hug, was a secure environment.
What he needed was love.
A friend of mine is, a behavioral specialist, and she just preaches, there's always a reason for the behaviors. There's always something behind. A kid's not acting out just to act out. And I had a kid who we were really struggling with, like you said, trying to communicate. Mom was out of the picture. He was being raised by his aunt. And we found out that she wasn't managing his diabetes. And I mean, by the time we started making sure that he was getting his blood sugar checked at school, I mean, he was in the 300s and 400s.
Holy cow.
I mean, like, that's like go to the emergency room levels. And we're like, well, no wonder. Like, no wonder you can, in fourth grade, when you have that kind of physical, like, difficulty, it almost set itself up as a secondary, almost disability of just like he wasn't being managed at home. And so once we kind of started to help and create a health plan, get some supports at school, make sure we are checking things regularly. And this poor kid would have accidents because, guess what happens when your blood sugars are all messed up and, you have issues with diabetes with, your urine. But if the team's not communicating, right? So then you bring in your nurse, and I had to get educated on what can happen when your blood sugars are wacky, what kind of behaviors, what should we do? And without that team communication, and then we finally, we brought Aunt in and tried to help educate her. And but without that team communication, those discussions, like, we would have never been able to help him feel better. And
yeah, right. And that's the thing is the child, right? So like, if they can't communicate that they got a new dog, then you don't get to share in that excitement. If
right.
we don't know that there's new medication, we don't know to look for the symptoms at school, and a child might get disciplined or removed from a classroom or something because they're too tired or because they're too energetic or whatever, and it could just be medicine.
Right.
Yeah. So
I have parents, and I'm so grateful that will send me emails like in the morning, like, we woke up at 3 a.m. and then we didn't go back to bed until 5. And so it might be a little rough. Or I've even had kids that, have difficulty with maybe parents that leave before they go to school who forget medicine, or whatever. And, I'll be like, look, kid, just tell me if you didn't take your meds today. Like, I'd rather you just come tell me, or get a text from a parent or whatever, say, hey, Timmy's not coming to school with meds today, good luck.
right.
But it does shift my approach. It does shift from a position of, oh my gosh, I can't believe Timmy is doing this to me today, to, oh my gosh, Timmy must be really struggling, and how can I help him today?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And so we as parents have the obligation to do that. Now, the other thing we wanted to talk about was communication within the school, specifically between gen ed and special ed.
Yeah.
And so we had an experience at my school this week where Jack takes a booster is an old word in our house. We take a Ritalin booster. So he takes Ritalin at noon. And we increased his dose over Christmas, but we had to get the form for school because lawyers make people have silly things like forms. And the form from the doctor.
Class C drug might need a form.
Yeah. Prescription drug. I mean, right. Come on, it's only Ritalin, Becca. And so the form wasn't in, so he was getting his old dose at school. One of the things that happens to Jack when he's dysregulated is his temperature goes up, and guess what? Your temperature cannot go up during the COVID-19 pandemic at school.
That's an automatic bye-bye.
Automatic bye-bye. And so school nurse had not said to special ed teacher, hey, we're giving the old dose because we're waiting on the form. And special ed teacher was now not in the loop. Most importantly, the general contractor, I hadn't told, the special ed teacher. So what's Jack do in the cafeteria? But he does the Incredible Hulk. He had a little tiny hole in his shirt, and he ripped his shirt off, and then all the people in the cafeteria were laughing. And so that was the text I got. And also his temperature was up, and they were like, anything we should worry about? And I was like, oh yeah, he's not getting the right dose of Ritalin. So that, kind of leads.
They need changes. Yeah.
There's the bad story. How do we communicate not only about behaviors and that kind of stuff that like comes from home and whatnot, but how can this work well when school people communicate well, particularly gen ed and special ed?
Yeah. One of the things that I've been super grateful for communication in this kind of new technology arena, is Google, Google Drive. And we will put a lot of notes, with privately, shared documents and things like that in Google Drive. One of the ways that we always try and communicate with gen ed teachers, sometimes the IEP is super overwhelming. The system that we use within my district provides what's called an IEP at a glance, which just like is all the important bullet points. So we always make sure that teachers have a full IEP, teachers have an IEP at a glance. And then we discuss with the classroom teacher, what is the best way that we can communicate and collaborate. And it's so important, I think, for us to come to the table and remember that, that we always need to be professional and considerate, like even if we're not seeing eye to eye. And I think one of those ways is to make sure that we're communicating with in the most comfortable way that we can with each other. So I try and be flexible and communicate with the general education teacher in the best way that they can. For some teachers, that's email. For some teachers, that is text message. And for some teachers, that's an in-person, I'm going to drop by your class. I know that there's a very specific a teacher in my building that does not, with absolution, want me popping into her classroom. And that's, I'm not saying that as a bad thing.
Right, right.
But unless
she's
it's
in
like
a groove, don't mess up her groove.
It's a super emergency, do not interrupt, right? And I learned that the hard way. What do you want? So, I think that learning the best form first, and then, we have to always take the initiative to communicate that, to communicate to the classroom teacher. Don't just assume. Regular check-ins are very important. Just as we have regular rhythms within our own life and our personal lives, regular rhythms within our professional lives for communicating with our teams is of the utmost importance. So, And
so what do parents do, Becca? Because I am always astonished when gen ed teachers aren't looking at the data. Like,
yeah,
how are you helping to support the IEP, particularly for my children that have specific learning disabilities where they aren't out of the gen ed classroom very much?
Right.
Or, some kids might go to speech for phonological processing, which then comes right back into reading.
Yeah.
I struggle with this myself, and it might be situational, but how as a parent can you say, like, you're looking at the data, right? You guys are cool.
Yeah. So, all of my teachers first, when I deliver progress reports, first they get that progress report to go home first. So hopefully they are looking at it. But and again, maybe this is just kind of unique, and I feel super blessed and fortunate for this, but most of my kids I'm in class with almost every single day in gen ed for at least a portion of the day. So we will look and double check their accounts where all of their grades are. And then I will then subsequently share a folder oftentimes of their progress report data. So I can print out some of the programs that I use. I can print out graphs and I can print out running records. For some of my kiddos, this year I have a kind of a broad range. So I have first and fifth grades. So for my first graders, where I'm teaching more of that one-on-one or small group, resource or extended learning area, more explicit lessons, I have running records that are handwritten. Oftentimes I'll give at the end of the quarter or midterm, I'll give the classroom teacher those running records so that they can see where they are. With one of my classroom teachers for a kiddo that I see regularly, we have a regularly scheduled Thursday meeting that is kind of like because we don't really necessarily co-teach with that class, but we will do a regularly scheduled Thursday meeting, and I will say, hey, here's where we are. Like we just had ours on Friday, actually, instead of Thursday, because it ended up being a cold day, and we're like, let's just move it to tomorrow, to today. But my big thing with a student was ESY data. Did they have any regression over the break? And so we sat down and we went over, and I checked every single goal of his and goal area to see what the data was after break. So we sat down together and reviewed that post break data together, because we have this regularly scheduled communication meeting every single Thursday. And sometimes we text each other and we say, I don't have anything today. Do you just want to wait till next week? And we're like, sure, sounds great. Or I have another meeting, can we push it back? But excuse me, if we have those rhythms set into our schedule, and, you know, again, I'm just going to go back. We have the relationship, you know, we've built that relationship. It is vitally important that we build that.
Yeah.
Well,
and that's
relationship. So, and
you know, from a parent's perspective, those are all things that you can ask for gracefully if you can figure out situationally how to do that. And truly, that's the key, is to make sure that that communication is happening regardless. One successful way that I've made sure that it's happening is I've talked to the principal and said, you know, this is not an IEP thing. This is more of a leadership thing. And I see a success happening when, like, if you can trickle down this leadership, basically, to make sure that these two are talking, or that the team talks regularly. I think that happens. But also, Becca, I think when I communicate with anybody on the team, I always stop and think, who else could benefit from this? So if I communicate I never just talk to OT.
Oh, no.
Because I want OT to talk to everybody else, and I want to schedule that. What I want to do is I want to model that. Hey, OT, I have a question, and I bet gen ed and special ed could benefit from it too.
We have a specific meeting, you know, monthly, that includes OT, PT, speech, both of our reading specialists in the building. You know, so we, again, you know, those regular rhythms of, hey, we may not hit every single thing. Or I mean, there might be a week where I don't even see necessarily the speech therapist, because we're like, you know, I'm up way on the other, you know, side of where she is. But so yeah, you know, you always want to make sure, especially health and safety wise, CC everyone.
I agree entirely.
You know, the only caution, you know, that you have to look at is, you know, if this teacher is not involved in the child's education, you know, obviously I'm not going to copy a kindergarten teacher on a fifth grade, you know, a fifth grade, and you can kind of be very cautious with that, because sometimes it might be a FERPA violation. But you have to just copy, when in doubt, copy the team. I guess.
I agree entirely. Yeah. Becca, this has been so helpful. I think it gives parents a really good view into the communication and the kind of inner workings and interests of people inside the school. And I think it gives teachers the view from a parent's perspective. So you are speaking at our second annual virtual and free special education and advocacy conference. Give us a preview of your topic. Can you describe what you're going to talk about?
Yeah, so kind of similarly, you know, to what we've discussed today, it's effective communication for IEP school teams. And, you know, I kind of start by going over, you know, what is the school team? Like, who, if you're going to communicate, who are you communicating to? And then dive into, you know, things that are required, different strategies, considerations, techniques, like I just said about with that fancy FERPA word that I just said, which is privacy, and then collaboration, like what kind of collaboration and how can you foster collaboration within your team, so that you are creating an effective team to further the development and progress of your child. And I hope that people get some good tips and tools. And I know that, not everybody does everything the exact same way. And if anybody's like me, I kind of pick and choose and connect with ideas in different ways. And then I'll implement those in the way that works for me. So I hope it's helpful and insightful.
I hope it will be. I am sure it will be. And I'm so grateful. Becca, thank you for joining us. Don't forget to
No
check out
problem.
the Special Education and Advocacy Conference on January 22nd, 2022. We're running from 9 a.m. until 1 p.m. Eastern. And if you can't make it, of course, don't forget that there's a VIP pass that's available on the website, $49, and it gives you on-demand access for at least 30 days, usually more. Becca,
Cool.
thank you.
I wish I could meet you in the parking lot.
I know.
Driveway,
I know.
maybe. No, just
I
kidding.
wish my audience could meet us in the parking lot. Maybe
Soon.
we'll do a retreat.
Yeah, or coffee soon. Thank you, Ashley, for having me. It's been a pleasure. And as usual, I could talk to you all day long. So
Agree. Coffee soon.